as the Imam Rahimahullah Ta'ala mentioned at the conclusion of these 9 principles, basically saying the only thing left that he wants to tackle, or at least to make mention of, are a number of different tools, if you will, that complete the pursuit of suluk, or the development of your spiritual capacity. And these tools should be looked at like the various recommendations of prayer. Obviously, the principles serving as pillars and obligations. So, we'll take a look at the first one. And the Imam Rahimahullah Ta'ala, he says, this is Al-Fasl Awwal, basically part number 1, safeguarding one's temperament within the capacity of the journey. He said they should mind their temperament and its conditions, or its state. It should be between negligence and excessiveness, neither overly satiated nor extremely famished. It should be balanced between being abstemious and indulgent, and between detachment and engagement. He says, so you kind of see where he's going. Like, we're trying to find a harmony here, and the harmony is in the balance of things. So the key for us is going to be understanding what balance actually is. All right, that's the importance of this pursuit. That's the importance of this study, is so you can identify what balance is, because sometimes we may be out of balance and think we are living a balanced life. In either direction. We may be too far to the right and we think, hey, look, this is moderate. We may be too far to the left, thinking that we're actually moderate. And the only way that we're going to determine what moderation is, or what balance is calibrating our spiritual, moral compass with the true north, if you will, of the Prophet's practice, his sunnah. So that's another thing that has to be considered, and that's why that's why the pursuit of knowledge is just absolutely essential in our success here. It says there are some in the capacity of their journey and in suluk who deprive themselves with difficult exercises such as starvation and sleeplessness, possibly abandoning the means out of judiciousness, which results in a deviation of temperament, thus severing the journey. A person can obviously push themselves too far. A person can overwork themselves and overdo it, which would end up, eventually leading to their own spiritual demise. It could be like a burnout. A person could have a burnout. So it's important that you're in touch with your own temperament here, that you know what you're capable of handling while not being too negligent, not going too extreme or too negligent. And there was actually a hadith that was reported, and this, I believe you can find it in the collection of Imam Ahmad Rahimahullah Ta'ala, in which he came home and his wife Aisha was with a woman in the house, and the Prophet ﷺ came in and he asked who that was, and she said, this is the woman that people are talking about her prayer, meaning she had become well known for like the amount of praying that she did. What I mean is, it was not like a little amount. It was like, she prayed a great deal, and she became kind of well known for that. And so the Prophet ﷺ basically said, like, look, you've only been prescribed to do what you're capable of doing. And Allah will not cease in, basically rewarding you and showing mercy until you cease to act and do deeds. He says Allah loves the actions and the deeds that are consistent. He says the best nutrition for them is a balanced and moderate diet, and avoidance of eating things which produce melancholy, such as dry bread, all of which are harmful to one's temperament and sever the journey and suluk. So every once in a while you'll find that, obviously, you could take this as a metaphor if you want. The best nutrition for the soul is a balanced and moderate diet of religious practice and action, avoidance of eating things. But then, he talks about some practical things here as well. As diet is also a part of everything. Diet is a part of who you are. We're obviously commanded to eat from the halal things, And that's kind of something that we discussed in the past. But you should also be picky and concerned about the actual types of foods. We've all experienced this. I mean, we're living in a time now in Ramadan where, you know, it can be a little bit sensitive in terms of what we eat. We get something to eat in us, and then we want to go to sleep, or, you know, we'll eat too much and then we'll become lethargic, or he's, you know, like, or it may be that we're just eating dry bread all the time, and so it's kind of like it gets boring, you know. You become weary. These things harm the person's temperament, and they end up being, you know, to your own demise. And so this is something we're looking at in terms of looking at a marathon as opposed to a sprint, basically. Another great example was found, the Prophet ﷺ, when a group of people came to him, and some of them said, we're not going to get married. Some of them said, I'm going to pray and I'm not going to sleep. Some of them said, we're going to fast, we're not going to break our fast. And when that reached the Prophet ﷺ, when that news reached him ﷺ, he says, what's up with people that say such and such? Basically, you know what he says. He says, I fast and I break my fast. I pray and I sleep. And I marry women. And whoever turns away from my way cannot be associated with me. So here's another example of moderation, what moderation actually looks like. The Prophet ﷺ prayed, he slept, he fasted. Some days he didn't fast. Sometimes it was noted by the companions that it appeared as if he never fasted. Sometimes it appears as if he fasted and then never broke his fast. I mean, he would mix it up. He would mix things up based on circumstances. So sometimes he wouldn't break his fast because he was busy with other things. He was busy hosting people or with delegations, or something was there that would, you know, keep him from doing that. And so he would prioritize things in his life, and then he would take into consideration what was going on and what he should be doing. And that's what we need to do as well. And there's another great example found in the story of Salman al-Farisi and Abu Darda. And Salman al-Farisi, he went to visit Abu Darda, and they had been paired together by the Prophet ﷺ during the Mu'akha, which was the brotherhood that he instituted. And, you know, he went to visit Abu Darda. He found that his wife, Abu Darda's wife, was, looking a little bit, you know, she's like wearing work clothes or whatever, which he inquired, you know, what's going on. And she said, look, your brother has no need for the worldly delights, you know, basically like he's got no need for me. He's like turned away. And then, as you're probably familiar with the story, you know, he went and spent some time with Abu Darda, and he noticed that he was fasting. So Abu Darda wanted to feed him, to serve him food, and he's like, look, I'm not going to eat until you eat, basically. And then when it was time, he basically staying over the night. When it was time to go to sleep, Abu Darda wanted to pray. And so Salman al-Farisi was like, look, you got to sleep some. So he had him sleep. And then he tried to get up, and he said, nope, it's not time for the night prayer yet. So they slept again. And then finally, at the end of this meeting, Abu Darda was telling, Salman al-Farisi was telling Abu Darda, look, Allah has rights, and your family has rights, and your body has rights over you, and you have to give everybody their due right. And then when they went to the Prophet ﷺ, the Prophet ﷺ agreed that Salman al-Farisi was in the right, that you have to be fulfilling all of the rights and not just leaning heavily on one or the other. So there you go, keeping that balance. So you're not going to neglect the rights of Allah for fulfilling the rights of your spouse. Well, I'm just going to spend all my time in the company of my spouse, and we're just going to hang out and have a good time. I got to give the wife her rights, or I got to give my husband his rights. And doing that means we're watching TV and movies and playing and all that. And then we never actually have time for prayer. We're going out and that is fine in its proper place. I mean, the Prophet ﷺ engaged with his wives in a very, very beautiful way. He would, like we very well know the story of Aisha radiallahu anha when they raced, and then they obviously had another race later on, and there were experiences that they shared as husband and wife that were lighthearted and fun, and to kind of pass the time in each other's company. But then it was also like in Ramadan, the Prophet ﷺ said, or it was said of him, that he tightened his waist belt in the last 10 nights. He enlivened his night with prayer, and he woke up his family to join him in prayer. So you can see there's a very balanced approach to how he used to do. So that's point number one. Point number two, or tool number two, is called avoidance of accompanying the young. And he actually is specific about the gender. It's like young boys or young men. And this is something that you'll find in the works more, I guess you would say, you would find this topic in works of the scholars during this era, around this era. And I think there's a lot that can be said about why that is, in terms of the way the society was operating. However, and I'll talk a little bit about that and, why this is here. He says, whoever is found to be physically attractive, be they young or with sideburns. So they're talking about young boys. So either they have no facial hair, that's what he's talking about, or they have sideburns where they just start growing a beard. Like, the sideburns, most of us know that, most men know that, you're typically like growing a few little sideburns before you become like a full-grown bearded man. He says, be they young or with sideburns, can enamor the inner being, suspending and soiling the intent, or the objective and the purpose, thus defiling the heart just as the clothing becomes defiled with impurity, because the human spirit is inclined to attractive figures, regardless if the servant intends such or not, and can occur without notice, especially for bachelors, unmarried men. And so staying away from them is even more stressed due to their need for marriage and potential for desire to form in their heart. Right? So, contextually, I think that the way that they lived in the Muslim world during that time, when it came to gender relations, was very much more conservative than what we're used to now, especially in the way of dress. And so the exposure to the opposite gender, men to women, was very little, perhaps. And so, the potential for having some attraction, for a man having an attraction for a younger boy, which you find like today in the churches, and it's not all of them, of course. I'm not going to blame all of them, but we do see that as a trend, in that, you get isolated, you're not married, and then there's opportunity, and then something goes awry, terribly awry. So, it was like you could have this mentorship, if you will, and you're exposed to this environment. So, anyway, basically he's talking about, having a homosexual tendency, or acting upon an impulse, being overwhelmed with some type of desire for, and it doesn't matter. It's not specific to just, young boys, or it's for anybody. But I think the context here is important to grasp, in that, this is probably something that was troubling. And you'll find Ibn Abdul Qawi, for example, he wrote 1,000 lines of etiquette. In his 1,000 lines of etiquette, this Ibn Abdul Qawi al-Hanbali, he says, وَيَحْرُمُ رَأْيُ الْمُرْدِ مَعَ شَهْوَةٍ فَقَطْ وَقِيلَ مَعَ خَوْفٍ وَلِلْكُرْهِ جَوِّدِ. He says, lustful looking at lads deemed unlawful, it's said from fear, but rightfully awful. So that's a poetic, it's kind of like a little rhymey translation there. Lustful looking at lads has been deemed unlawful. It's said from fear, but rightfully awful. Basically here, he's saying that it's impermissible to look at these young boys if you have any type of desire, sensual desire. While it has been said, as another opinion, if you fear something may happen, which is, of course, rightfully awful. And so this is a heinous sex crime. It's committed when children are involved. It's more heinous typically in our minds than if it's adults. It's especially, there should be special manners observed when dealing with young innocent children, such as lowering one's gaze. Young children, in particular young boys, have and continue to be a source of great temptation for many, as we can see within different settings. And so the scholars of the past, they used to, some of them deemed it unrestrictedly impermissible to gaze at young lads. And I believe Imam Shafi'i, rahimahullah ta'ala, was one of those, that he deemed it impermissible totally. Even if there was no fear of, no impulse or sexual impulse. So basically, this is one of the pitfalls. And so he's giving us a tool here to apply, and we can apply that across the board. The Imam, he says, to accompany a ravenous beast of prey is better for them than to live with an attractive youth or attractive young person or boy. Even if they're righteous, for the harm of the righteous upon the ascetic is worse, as they share a connection. They share a connection of piety. So now you have two pious people, a young boy and a man. And if this were to happen, it would just be destruction for everybody. The wayfarer should therefore stay away from them and the places in which they congregate and live as much as possible. If they are tested with teaching or its like, they should be extremely careful. And there were also some lines of poetry that were written by Ibn Abdul Qawi al-Hanbali regards to staying away from where they would be living, like if they were in a dormitory or, like the playgrounds, So even today, it's kind of creepy when you think about it, for an older person to constantly, especially men, an older man constantly lingering around without purpose, without a legitimate cause, lingering around a bunch of little kids. And that's another reason why you have to observe manners here. Maybe there's no evil intent or there's no impulse or there's nothing there at all. There's nothing inside a person's heart. They're just there for some reason. But you can be subject to scrutiny. You can be subject to a person's evil assumption. And so, people that work in communities, and for example, like Sunday schools and after school programs and things like that, then they have to be careful. And that's why a lot of institutions, they put in certain protocols and have certain guidelines to observe when it comes to being around children. Like, for example, not being in a closed room. They would have like the door open, and they have a glass window or a glass door, so that there's always some type of accountability. And it's for both the safety of the kids and the safety of the adult. So that it's like, look, you can't accuse me of something that hasn't been committed. So the objective will not be achieved. He says the objective will not be achieved without a pure venue. If they need to purify their venue, then they must stay away from possible contamination. So your environment has a great deal to play. So just like the heart is required to be pure in order to receive Allah's light, it may be that the pure environment is needed to protect you from ruining that. Right, so that's point number 2. Point number 3, he says, researching the sunnah of Allah's messenger, including his eating, drinking, sleeping, his character, fellowship with his wives and companions. And I kind of hinted at that with the story of Aisha, radiallahu anha, and what he used to do with his companions. Remembrances during mishaps, night prayers, the siwak and purification, basically everything. There's nothing that is unimportant. There's nothing that is without some type of substance to it. There's nothing that is, worthless in the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. From the most major of occurrences to the most minor of etiquettes, those things should be studied and learned. After this, they should imitate him as much as possible. He says, after a survey of his life and his miracles, the evidence of prophethood will settle in their heart, and knowledge of the message and its evidence will serve as a stool upon which monotheism is built. We've talked about this. This is from the very beginning, the Imam's introduction, if you will, or kind of like the origins of ma'rifah and mahabba. They're like the origins of love and gnosis, in that they begin with the Prophet ﷺ. Right, so the more familiar you are with the Prophet ﷺ, the more certain you will be of his prophethood. And the more certain you are of his prophethood, the more accepting you will be of his message. Okay? So this is a very important part of our pursuit. And, you begin with the basics. You begin learning the basics about the Prophet ﷺ, and then your study grows, it grows kind of in a orderly fashion. There's a course that one of the books that we looked at recently was the summarized or the abridged biography of the Prophet ﷺ by Abdul Ghani al-Maqdisi rahimahullah. It just gives you the basic. That was his version of what you need to know. What you absolutely need to know. That's what Abdul Ghani, he wrote that book for. Most absolute essential things of the Prophet ﷺ. So that's where you begin. You begin with that, and then you move on, and you progressively learn more and more about him ﷺ. It says, with all of this, compliance will be valid. Compliance meaning al-ittiba', that's the following and the imitating of the Prophet ﷺ. He says it will be valid, which results in the love of Allah the Most High. As He Azza wa Jal says, قُلْ إِن كُنْتُمْ تُحِبُّونَ اللَّهِ فَاتَّبِعُونِي يُحْبِبُكُمُ اللَّهِ. Say, if you love Allah, then follow me, and Allah will love you. This is in the Quran. Okay, so following the Prophet ﷺ, it will result in you loving Allah and Allah loving you in return. He goes on and he says, if they read the glorious Quran, they should remember the Prophet ﷺ and will thus witness him in the Quran with his companions and Allah Azza wa Jal addressing him, and thus they will understand Allah's commands, prohibitions, and intents as previously mentioned in the etiquettes of prayer or the manners of prayer. It was reported by Aisha radiallahu anhu, or she said, that the Prophet ﷺ, his manners were that of the Quran. He was the one that was receiving it, and then he was the one that was embodying its teachings in action. And so if you're able to remember the Prophet ﷺ and his sunnah, that which you've studied, the seerah, his life and the events, while you're reading the Quran, you're able to have a better understanding of the context of the verses and the commands and the prohibitions. And you can see how he implemented and how he acted and how he was able to embody, as it says in this, كَانَ خُلُقُهُ الْقُرْآنِ, that his manners, or his character was that of the Quran. So God willing, this will open the heart's pores, and through them, with success from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, conferment of Allah, divine light will flow in. So that's number 3, researching the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. Part number 4 says not missing night prayer at the time of the Lord's nuzul. This is an-nuzul al-ilahi, which is typically translated as descending. Okay, so this is a very, very important tool. Number 4, Imam says whoever consistently prays at that time, the last third of the night, even if only 2 rak'ahs of prayer, which are lengthy and followed by supplications of forgiveness, and if they can do more, they should, it's likely that they will be answered, and flowing radiance will reach the heart, Allah willing. This is a very special time. It's a very special time. And he mentions why. He says the best time to recite is at night because it is more effective for concurrence of the heart and tongue and more suitable for words. That's an ayah in the Quran that he's quoting. So as at night, one's intent is composed and their heart is and their mind is clear. Your intent is composed, meaning you're not thinking about 12 different things. Once you start your day, I don't know about you, but for me, once I start my day, I start thinking about, okay, what's my task list? What do I need to get done? I've got to go to work. What I got to do at work? After work, what do I got to do then? I've got to go to the store. I've got to get the oil changed in the car. I've got to check the, kids' homework. I've got to sit down and whatever I have to do. Everything is spinning around. And so to be able to compose yourself in the daytime is very difficult. The day is for working. The day is for, living life as we have come to know. It's very busy. But at night, things are shut. Things are closed. So this is a very important time. It's a very special time, not only because of the practical, benefits as mentioned here, but also because this is the time, as he indicates, is the last third of the night. Is very special as it pertains to connecting with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It says at night one's intent is composed and their mind is clear, and so they are able to recite while remembering the glorified in those words. They're able to remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala while they are reciting, listening to Him. They're reciting His words, so they're listening to Allah and they're understanding. So missing out on the night and one's regular litany of prayers demonstrates a lack of interest and misfortune. So most of the fortunate have obtained their share from standing at night, and so the murid should not miss out in that. If the servant is an aspiring jurist, right, somebody who's mutafaqih, they want to learn like law, Islamic law. If they are an aspiring jurist, they should reserve the day for studies and the night to turn to Allah Azza wa Jal. Friday should also be made exclusively for Allah. It's a gauge which measures the servant and all they did during the week. He says if the previous week was pure, the servant was not tarnished by sin, Friday would be a day of light and abundance. If the week was adulterated, meaning there was a mixture of sin and righteousness, Friday will be gloomy, and they will be met with weariness, fatigue, and disinterest in the whole thing. All right, so that's number 4, talking about the night prayers and how important they are to maintain. The last one, point number 5, this is to be in a continuous need of Allah Azza wa Jal, embarking upon His servitude, relying upon Him and trusting Him and constantly seeking refuge in Him or with Him. You know, entrusting Him means like you're just giving it up. Like you're giving up the results of your actions to Allah. Look, everything is in your hands. Everything is in your power. Everything is by your decree. I'm going to do my part, but I'm not going to get overly fixated on what happens at the end. It's all going to happen based on how Allah has decreed it. So having that sense of need, like I need Allah to be successful. I need Allah to see me through. I need Allah to protect and provide for me. And this is something that should happen in the nafs. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-Fatir, verse number 15, Ya ayyuhan nasu antumul fuqara'u ila Allah, wallahu huwal ghaniyyul hamid. O mankind, you are those in need of Allah. This is al-iftiqar. Al-iftiqar is the word that's used. And so Allah is saying al-fuqara. They come from the same word, the same root word. Al-iftiqar means to feel, if you will, this need. And fuqara is the reality of being impoverished and destitute to Allah. Wallahu huwal ghaniyyul hamid. And Allah is the free of need, the praiseworthy. It was said that refuge will be based on knowledge of the trial's degree. How will you seek refuge? Based on what you understand of the trial. Imam goes on, he says, this is what servitude of the sustainer, Al-Qayyum, requires, whose grasp contains all hearts and souls, directing them as he wishes, as is reported in the hadith, O turner of hearts, or O director of hearts. So it's either Ya Sarif al-Qulub or Ya Muqallib al-Qulub. So Ya Sarif al-Qulub, Allah, there's multiple different narrations with some variant wordings. It says, direct my heart to your obedience or turn my heart to your obedience. Either one. So whoever witnesses, so basically here you're showing your reliance upon Allah and that you realize your heart is not even your own heart is not in your control, but it's in the control of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and therefore you are reliant and in need of Him. So you continuously ask and beg of Him, guide my heart. Keep me on the straight path. I mean, that's what we're doing anyway. I mean, in our prayers, Ihdina sirat al-mustaqim, guide me to the straight way. And then between those prayers, we're asking Allah to keep our hearts fixed and firm upon the truth. That's the need that's displayed. That's the feeling that we have inside of us, that look, we're reliant solely upon Allah. Whoever witnesses the subsistence, basically like the sustaining, if you will, the sustaining of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will become attached to Allah Azza wa Jal in all remaining states, for all events, be they good or evil, are the result of His grace or decree. So when you can actually acknowledge that, see that, embrace that, then you will become even more attached to Allah. When things don't go your way, the first thing you should be saying is, قَدَّرَ اللَّهُ مَا شَاءَ فَعَلَ. Allah has decreed whatever Allah has decreed will happen. I mean, that's just the reality of things. So it's therefore a must that we constantly need Allah the Most High to preserve us in His obedience and protect us from His disobedience. This is a major principle that many are inconsistent with and therefore miss out on much grace. He says, some of the sheikhs have said, whoever is constantly seeking refuge with Allah in eating, drinking, coming and going in all of their endeavors, Allah Azza wa Jalla will open the door to the spectacles and mashahid. We talked about those before, for them. And this is enlightenment of the inner being with the radiance of the magnificent and sublime. Again, when you approach Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then Allah will approach you with these types of blessings. So this is the path to Allah Azza wa Jal, which will connect the servant to Him, so long as they are consistent in it. It's been reported in a hadith that the Prophet ﷺ said, O ever-living, O sustainer, Ya Hayyu Ya Qayyum, I call upon you, do not place me in charge of my soul, even for the blinking of an eye. Rectify all of my affairs. There is no deity worthy of worship except you. And with that supplication there, Imam says this is the last of what's feasible. And so all praise belongs to Allah. And may His abundant peace and prayers be upon our Master, Muhammad, his family, and his companions. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. And that concludes this short yet potent and powerful book by our Imam and Shaykh Ibn Shaykh al-Hazamiyin, Ahmad ibn Ibrahim al-Wasiti. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala shower him with mercy and continue to benefit him with what he left behind for us as the followers of the Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam.